look at.
Hey, Kat. Well, thank you. It is good to be here today. But really one of the first things that I'm going to be looking at is the margins and how our overall business is doing for whether it's a particular type of agreement or agreement types. And so I'm looking over here. If we look on my screen over here on the kind of the bottom right-hand side, I can see our margin trends. So in this case, I'm looking at about, or I am looking at an 8-month trend since the beginning, the end of last year. And so I can see where our monthly recurring revenue, this top line, is my invoicing amount. And so I can see where I was, and I can see on a month-by-month basis whether it's going up or going down. And at the same time, on this green line, this is my margin line. So this is going to show me exactly what my profit, my margin is after I have all my expenses taken care of against those dollars. So the closer that these two lines are to each other, the better we are. So that gives me a really good idea of kind of how we are doing overall. The other way that I can get an idea of how we're doing financially on as far as how we're doing in our managed service practice is by looking at the effective rate. And the effective rate is one of those things that people are used to looking at. Basically, the idea is if I was to look at all of our contract, our revenue that we have coming in from agreements, and I divide that by the total number of hours that we're spending against those contracts, then that's going to give me what my effective rate is. Now, we've done something that's kind of cool with the way that we're looking at our effective rate. So you can see that right now, our effective rate, based on the agreements that I have set up, that I've configured, I believe I have this just set to some specific MSP agreements, I can see that we're at $181.48. Now, what's interesting is if I do a drill down on the effective rate, it's going to take it here a minute to open up. It's going to give me an idea of what my effective rate has been over time. But more importantly, or just as important, if you take a look here at this last bar, this is the current month, sorry, this last number. And it's a little bit different. It says 158 for the month of August, whereas right now we can see it we're at 181.48. This is really giving us what our projection is for what at the end of the month what we are projected to be for our effective rate. So we can see when we have some big contracts coming on board, we haven't done the work, we start pulling in those pulling that work in, and so our effective rate is dropping. But we've also set what our threshold is for what we feel that we need to have our effective rate at to be profitable. And in this case, you can see that this is set for, actually we don't have it in here, but it's at $135 an hour. So as long as I'm over that $135 an hour, I feel that we're doing okay on those agreements. So this gives us a really good idea of to get specific numbers of how we're doing, and importantly, again, what we're projected to be at the end of this month.
Okay. We have a lot of discussions at our company meetings about how effective rate isn't the best way to measure our profitability. What gives us a better picture of profitability?
Well, for us, that really goes into a little bit different concept of the labor-loaded gross margin percent. And what you can see over here on the left-hand side is really a breakdown of all those agreements. So the drill down from margins is going to go into the breakdown of agreements. And in this case, I'm looking at it by the labor-loaded gross margin. Now, what that does is it gives us a better idea than the effective rate because I'm taking in all of my costs into account, whereas effective rate is only looking at my total number of dollars divided by the total number of hours that have been spent. The labor-loaded gross margin is looking at it as a percentage. So this actually gives you a really good example of how this can be from a profitability percentage standpoint. You can see that I have one contract here that's actually it's a pretty decent-sized contract, has a lot of hours on it, but as a percentage, so whereas the margin as a percentage of the revenue, that labor-loaded gross margin percent, that is actually a lot lower than some of these other contracts which may be smaller. So even though they're smaller, as a percentage, they're more profitable. And this is really important when we're looking at these contracts, especially on the smaller contracts, because it is taking into account your cost of labor. So we had an example with one of our customers who was a high-profile customer, but it was a very small client and small contract. It was primarily several firewalls. And since they're a famous steak place, we found out that our very most expensive resource is called divs on whenever there was some basic maintenance that needed to be done. So instead of sending out somebody who might have been on a $8, $9, $10 an hour person for what really needed to be done, we're sending out our very top-level engineers who, by the way, it just ended up that a 5-minute problem would end up taking about an hour and a half because it included the free lunch at the steakhouse. So when you take it, if I'm looking at the effective rate, that hour and a half of my expensive person makes my profit a lot less than an hour of a much cheaper person. So that's why we really focus on the labor-loaded gross margin as a percentage. And in this particular graph, what this shows us is it gives me an immediate idea of, shows me 3 different bars. The bottom bar is how many hours has been spent up to this point in time. So I can see exactly how many hours. The next bar up is going to show me what the contract dollar is. So I can see how many dollars that is, and then based on the cost of those hours, who is doing the work, how much margin is left over, what's my profit on this contract. So this is going to give me a good idea of how much money we're making. And then in addition to that, that top bar is color-coded. So you can see over here based on our legend whether this is green, so it's going up over a 3-month trend. It's yellow, meaning it's staying the same, that the 3-month average is about the same. Or it's red, meaning it's dropping. So that gives us, again, a good idea of how we're doing at a very quick glance of, do I have a potential problem or not with a customer? And I can also double-click on it to drill down into a little bit more information. Let me actually pick maybe a little bit better one. This is probably a better one. So this is a longer-term contract. So in this case, when I drill down on it, I can see that as of right now, my estimated effective rate for this customer is at $80 an hour. So you can see that that's actually way below what our profit threshold typically is, and it's lower than what our 3-month average is. And you can see that the trend line is this is dropping down. So there's been a lot more work going into play for this customer to bring them up to speed as far as where they really need to be. But I can see that at a glance, again, right where we are right now, and then what my average has been. So that is just a very helpful piece of information. And in addition to that, if I have something that seems on any of these points as well, I can additionally double-click on it to drill in to see all of the tickets and where all that time is coming from. So if I have something that's dropped a whole lot, then we can see that at a very quick glance. Let's actually just take a quick look at that. If we look at this current month, we can see here major reason that our profitability is dropping is deploying app sets. So we had an additional 6.25 hours going into this customer on a fairly small contract that is going to really drop our profitability.
So let me ask, I want to open the forum. Does anybody have any questions? You want to raise your hand so we can just touch base on what we were just discussing? We just covered margins, average effective rate, and labor-loaded gross margin. Don't be afraid. Anybody have questions? Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hand, so we'll move on. We have a lot of...
Okay, so there was a question there on asking how do you add or remove clients from the screen. So that's going to depend, in this case, it's not looking at a specific company, but this is looking at agreement types. So this is actually a common thing. We'll actually see that here toward the end, that on the where it's important to keep in touch of your agreement types. So we'll have agreements that may not have dollars applied to it, a trade out, for instance. And so I want to make sure that I am categorizing my agreement types appropriately so that it would bring in just the ones that we're caring about. In this case, I'm looking at 3 different agreement types. That is my primary managed services contract. It excludes special circumstances that just really wouldn't apply.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. All right. So, yep, this is talking about V3. And so we'll have, Jesse, we can have a chat a little bit later as far as the V2, the older stuff, as it applies.
Okay, so what about the customers that don't have agreement, and what about the services that we do that's outside of contract?
So for outside of contract work, we like to use this gadget here. This is our WIP, our work in progress, and the cash value. And so the reason that I like to use this is I break out. Let me actually just make this a little bit bigger so you can maybe see it a little bit better. But this gives me the ability to see the total dollars that I have that have not yet been invoiced, so that work in progress. I can look at my total invoicing. That's a separate gadget. But I want to look at what hasn't been invoiced for me. So I can see that based on our last invoicing run at the end of last week, we have our value of our time inside of ConnectWise is going to be that almost $58,000 is covered under agreements. So those hours are going to be reflected over here in my customers under agreement by a labor-loaded gross margin that we were looking at earlier. And since I've already billed those customers for those services, I'm not getting additional revenue even though it shows up inside of ConnectWise as work in progress. However, outside of contract, so whether it's a contracted customer and there's an element that's, that exceeds the contract, is outside of the contract, or is simply non-contracted work, just hourly time and materials, that's going to show up here in cash. So I can tell that when we run invoicing, if I was to run it right now, then we're going to be invoicing an additional $41,000 in those invoices. And again, like we can in most of the agreements, I can go ahead and drill into it and get a good idea of what is that cash coming from, who are those customers, what are those dollars, what are those tickets that is going to be generating that $40-some-odd thousand in cash. All right. So go ahead and close that down.
Does anybody else have any questions? Mike, did you have your hand raised? Okay, so, okay, thanks, Mike, for answering. We're going to move along. I see that we have the PITO board here. What is that?
So we initially started this out as kind of a joke, and it was based on being able to have a really what customers are causing the most noise. And what we found is that people were focusing, they're saying, you know, this customer is kind of a, you know, they're just kind of a pain in the neck. Although PITA has a little bit different acronym, so that wasn't the PITN award. But we wanted to really focus on those customers to understand why. So in this case, I left this in. This is actually showing, it's going to show up as a customer in here because this is actually a trade-out account. So this is going to give me the number of tickets per $1,000 of revenue. So it's going to really look at the tickets and the time that's being spent with this customer per $1,000 of revenue, and it just assigns it into an index. So I can see that the one that showed up here that we were looking at happened to be the Broward Bar in this case. But I can also see all of the other customers and where they hit in that range. So this is going to show me that I can ignore. I only have one that's in the red, but I have these others that are in the yellow. So these people have a little bit too much noise than I should be seeing in the customer. So you'll notice here that that several of these are going to show up near the top of the list as far as my lesser profitable customers. So this one of A&F, their PITA index is 10, and they're showing up right up here near the top of where there's both too much noise as far as number of tickets and a lot of time going against those tickets to show that those are somebody that needs to be maybe paid a little bit special care toward. So that's really how we use the PITA award. Now, I will say that most of the time we don't leave it up there as the PITA award. We have some of our friends at Clever Ducks. They have it as the frequent flyer. So you can always change that image, and obviously if you're going to be having this as a customer-facing, I definitely wouldn't have PETA sitting up there for our customers to see because it gives it kind of the wrong connotation. But whether it's a flight of ducks or your special award or somebody who needs just a little bit of extra care and attention, that's what the PETA meter does, is it really shows you where those, which customers are generating the most noise for the amount of money that they're spending with you.
Okay, and from what I understand, you said it's estimated by the number of tickets per $1,000 of revenue. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's our 5 gadgets, and I want to open the forum if anybody has any questions. Also, I want to know if you guys can raise your hands if you're planning on going to IT Nation.
You're just getting everybody to raise their hands, whether or not they have a question.
Well, we're going to have a booth there. We're going to be sponsoring. Oh, I see yeses. I love it. Please come by and visit us at our booth at IT Nation. We're going to be offering cigars if you're into that, and also, obviously, more information about ConnectSMART. And we look forward to meeting you. So
do we have any other questions there, Evan?
All right.
Mike was wondering how to remove clients if you want to go in.
All right.
You want to know how to remove clients?
So, all right. Anything else? Swag. We're going to have swag. Come on, Jesse.
I love it.
All right. So, as we've been promising, we have promised that we're going to keep these short to 15 minutes of just kind of a little bit of a dig into these gadgets, and then the rest of the time is yours. So we do want to keep these short and sweet. So if there are no additional questions, we thank you all for your time being with us here today, and look forward to seeing you at our next little shindig here. All right. Have a good one. If you have any additional questions as well, you can always send an email to support@connectsmart.com or give us a call, and Kat or one of the other team will be happy to follow up with you. Thanks, and have a great day.
Cheers. Mike Paul, excellent. We're so closing him after September 4th.